Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Graham Spicer here, moderating OpenMicVO, brought to you by World Voices. And so glad that you're here with us this Sunday evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about narration, any form of narration. So explainer videos, web videos, corporate, training videos, e-learning, any form, like long-form narration, we're going to be talking about tonight. A couple of ground rules, as usual, I'd like to go over with you. The first one is, I certainly don't want to dissuade you from actively participating in the conversation. So definitely want you to add your 2 cents worth whenever you think that you've got a good question or you've got some information you'd like to share with us. But I do ask you to please mute your microphone if you're not actively participating in the conversation at that particular moment. And you can do that. There's a little microphone icon in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom meeting window, or there will be once I unmute you. And once you see that microphone icon, you just click on it to toggle mute on and off. So again, please keep yourself muted if you're not actively in the conversation at that particular moment. The second thing is that we're all professionals here of one type or another, and some of us have been in the business longer than others, but everyone deserves to be treated as the professional they are. So let's keep things positive, and let's not ignite any flaming wars tonight. The third thing I wanted to mention is that OpenMicVO gets posted to YouTube. And that means that any information that you share could end up wherever. I have no control over where the recordings on YouTube end up. So just keep that in mind and be careful about sharing any sort of confidential information. And the fourth thing I want to mention is OpenMicVO is brought to you tonight by World Voices. And OpenMicVO is now a part of the World Voices outreach program. But I do want to make clear that anything that I say tonight or any of the opinions expressed by other participants tonight aren't necessarily the opinions of World Voices or don't necessarily represent the World Voices official viewpoint on the topic. So with that said, please, once you see that you are unmuted, feel free to ask the first question to get us started. You also always have the options of typing into the chat box or into the Q&A box if you are shy and don't want to open up your microphone tonight, or perhaps you're calling from a telephone or some other situation which is less than ideal from an audio standpoint. So let me start unmuting people here. Once you see that you're unmuted, please, you can do one of two things. Mute yourself, or feel free to ask us the first question.
Graham, I have a question.
Hello, Bill.
Hi. I'm just trying out this new rig. Can you hear me? I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, great. I can hear you pretty good too. Thanks.
Still unmuting people here. Tonight we're talking about narration, any form of narration. So perhaps it is web videos, explainer videos, training videos, e-learning programs. That is our topic for this evening. And
hi, I'm Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Glad that you're back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back too. I'm interested in getting into children's e-learning, and I was wondering how I should go about that.
Children's e-learning. That's a good question. Let me throw it out to the assembled participants here tonight. We've got about 20 of us online right now, so hopefully someone might have some suggestions. And in the meantime, let me put some thought to it. Anybody have any thoughts for Sarah on children's e-learning, like children's, like grade school type work?
Well, I am a school teacher. I spend a lot of time with pre-K through 8, and you have a wonderful voice for, I'd invite you to come read out loud to our kids anytime. There's certainly, I mean, we make use of a lot of different e-learning platforms. So definitely the market is out there. I would only suggest, reaching out to them if you have a demo ready. And they're usually pretty small organizations that are running, with teams of maybe 10 to 20 people that are writing and animating and creating. So they're pretty accessible, small organizations. And I say just send them a letter, make a phone call.
Bill, can you think off the top of your head of the names of some of these companies that produce the stuff that you're using in your classrooms?
Well, the really big publishers would be Glencoe McGraw-Hill. Pearson is huge. But I really think that she should look for a niche kind of publishers. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little search right now and see if I can come up with anything promising or that rings a bell.
Fantastic, Bill. Well, if you find something, if you wouldn't mind typing it into the chat box, and that way Sarah will definitely get a hold of it.
Not at all. I'll paste it right away.
That is very kind of you. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting a few people that have joined us here in the past couple of seconds. Tonight we're talking about narration. Who's got the next question for us? Next comment with regards to narration. It could be anything to do with performance of narration. It could have anything to do with business development, how to get more narration work.
Hi.
Anna Maria.
Yes, you can call me Annie. How are you?
Hello, Annie. Good. How are you tonight?
Good. Thank you very much. So I am my best area of work is commercial right now, and I would love to start making a lot more of narration work. My target is Hispanic, is Spanish mainly. So what is the best way for me to try and introduce myself into this market in the United States?
So let's throw that open to the participants tonight. Any advice on the Spanish market for narration? And Anna, I will tell you that Google is your friend. If you,
I am working on that. I actually hired someone to do some Google advanced search.
Fantastic.
And build a database, but that is more for production companies and stuff. But in terms of audition, audiobook or narration, e-learning, all that kind of stuff, if someone has sort of a heads up in terms of what is the person in charge, because I know sort of the positions for whatever it is, like more commercial, but what would be like the person in charge in all these companies that are e-learning, IVR, let's say, as well, documentaries and all that stuff, besides the creative, the casting directors and stuff? What is the best person to go like straight in this narration market? Sorry if my question is a little bit vague.
No, it makes perfect sense. I think that when it comes to, I mean, there's two ways to secure training and e-learning work, and one of them tends to be to go direct to client. And often the e-learning the e-learning content, if it's being developed internally by some of the larger companies, is often being produced in, sometimes there's an in-house media department, but more often than not, it's being supervised by someone in the human resources area. So that might be a place to start, is to start asking directors of human resources where they're getting their e-learning and training content from.
Perfect.
The the other route, of course, is going through e-learning production companies. And it sounds like you've got that well in hand with the researcher that you've hired to help you in putting together a list of those types of companies.
Yes, we're working on that, as well as LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
No problem. Talking about training videos, e-learning videos, explainer, any sort of narration.
Micro.
Who's got the next question for us?
Well, Graham, if you don't mind, I'm sort of still early on the path, and I'm looking at workflows, and I'm really attracted to narration, but audiobooks seems like such bread and butter for so many voiceover people. I'm curious as to how those workflows differ in terms of the times involved and so on. If anybody could comment.
So you're talking about the difference in workflows between kind of short form, not short form, but narration and doing audiobooks. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the narration is going to be a lot shorter, but I'm assuming that you do a lot more of it. In terms of my work schedule, my daily schedule, I'm wondering about the difference between coming home at the end of a workday and sitting down behind a mic and doing, recording a book versus coming and sitting down and going through a list of, auditions for projects and so on. And I'm wondering if anybody has experience in both of those things and can compare and contrast.
Well, before I became a full-time voice actor, I was like you, as I was working days, 9 to 5 in a corporate job and coming home and doing, voiceover work at night. And I always found that shorter form narration, under 10 minutes was a lot easier on me, especially because I often came home and you're tired naturally after a full day at work. And now you're excited about approaching these new voiceover opportunities, but you're still physically tired. And I found it easier to maintain the energy level I was required to over shorter form narration and do a few of them versus an audiobook type scenario where you really need to maintain the same energy level over, several hours of narration. That's tough. I mean, I have a lot of respect for audiobook narrators because ensuring that the book has a consistent flow, a consistent energy level, despite the fact that some of it was recorded at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night and some of it was recorded at 8:30 a.m. on a Monday morning when you're bright and shiny. So I always found in the past when I was working a corporate job that the shorter jobs were easier to maintain an appropriate energy level. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's really clear. And I do spend my entire day talking, as a school teacher, which is, it's a blessing and a curse. But so that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
We're up to almost 30 people now. So who's got the next question for us or next comment with regards to narration work?
Hey, Graham, I'm just going to question, this may be going over the same path, but the normal pay-to-play places, they're rarely, that I found, the narration gigs there, mostly commercial. Could you reiterate you said Google is your friend, of course. Could you reiterate those publishers and places to go out to beat the hedgerows for business? I didn't catch all of those. Thank you.
The ones that were mentioned earlier were primarily in the area of children's publishers. When we were talking about, I think it was Sarah who asked the question. Does anyone have any thoughts on publishers of of e-learning. It was e-learning you were talking about specifically, wasn't it, Dave?
Yeah, longer form narration, explainers, e-learning, the longer form narration ones. You went through a list of them again. Maybe it wasn't you, it was somebody else that made a list of, probably there was Pearson and Random House. Or
I think that was Bill. Bill, can you give us that quick list again?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long list, but right now I work a lot with Glencoe, McGraw-Hill. Pearson is huge. I'm actually going through online right now, just trying to come up with a list for Sarah of e-learning organizations. The big publishing houses, I mean, are slowly all kind of consolidating. Pearson is huge and has a lot of different imprints underneath for textbooks and so on. But, you know, we find that increasingly with textbooks, there are electronic versions, and there's usually a lot of multimedia content in addition. And I've been wondering also about kind of bespoke for service. I mean, we do have a lot of kids that are disabled with different types of learning disabilities, and so audio book presentations are really essential for them. You know, this is going back to the days of having like a little record player and headphones in the classroom, and it's come quite a long way. I am trying to compile a little bit of a list here, so if y'all will give me a little time and clear my throat.
Fantastic, Bill. We'll keep an eye on the chat box, and hopefully something will pop up there when you've got a moment to compile that list. Thank you so much.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah. Hey, Debbie, how are you?
Oh, good. How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you. Nice to hear you. And hello to everybody. I just wanted to respond to Dave and say that while I agree, I think it's a terrific idea to contact individual companies to develop that relationships, you know, one-to-one, so that you can get on their roster and be a go-to talent. I would encourage you to go back to those P2Ps that you are, where you feel like they're mostly commercial, offering commercial work, and tell you to give them another look, because in fact there's a tremendous amount of narration work that that gets posted to these sites.
Yeah, absolutely, Debbie. There's no doubt that, like in my experience, the jobs that I get exposed to on the pay-to-play sites, it's typically 70% or 75% narration versus commercial work. There's just a ton of, you know, just one-off explainer videos and a quick corporate video for their website, and then longer form stuff as well. So it definitely pay-to-plays are an appropriate spot to go fishing for narration work.
thanks, Debbie.
Sure enough, Dave. Sometimes, you know, we have to take another look in our own backyard to find what it is that we're, you know, been searching for, right? A la Dorothy. I have a question to pose, and that is, you know, in the commercial world, typically people are familiar with, you know, rates that are determined around usage. When it comes to narration work, my experience is that that's less so. And I wonder if anybody has any insights on how best to go about approaching having negotiations for pricing for these kinds of projects.
One of the first questions I always ask is the piece of content that you're going to be narrating for an internal audience or for an external audience? And, you know, I will always charge, you know, a substantial amount more for something that's going to be seen outside of the company. So if it's an internal corporate training video that's 5 minutes long, I might charge, I don't know, $500 or $600 or something like that. But if it's a 5 or 6 minute video that's going to be posted to YouTube and it's meant to be, presented to the consumer or a B2B audience, then I'll charge considerably more than, the $500 or so. I would think that the GVAA rate card would probably be of some use in this situation. They've done an extensive amount of research into this area of narration. So I think it's globalvoiceacademy.org or something like that. Maybe someone could do a quick search for me and type it into the chat box. It's the Global Voice
Rate card.
the Global Voice Acting Academy rate card.
Yeah, I'll give you the. I've heard of that a lot, and sometimes even share it. But it's more around, it's the old thing of like having to educate people.
Right.
And in my experience, because, and because we're getting into all the, that it's the internet and it's where, things are playing in all sorts of new media venues, that it becomes a little bit more challenging to have that conversation in a meaningful way. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Again, the main differentiator for me is whether it's an internal or if it's internal or meant for external audiences. That's the thing that matters most to me when I'm trying to come up with a price. Other questions for us tonight in this area of narration, any form of narration?
Yeah. So I have two questions, and to all the participants in here, sorry if I make too many questions. I'm so sorry, but I'm very, very curious. So the first one is, in terms of demos, there's this preconception about the corporate narration demo. There's also the industrial demo, that it all goes like mixed. And so what is the best that you should show in your demo for narration? What are the genres and the sub-genres in terms of demos? What is like a safe road to go to?
So just to make sure I understand the question properly, so you're asking what's the best form of content or the best types of segments to use in a narration demo that can kind of fit all purposes. Is that what you're asking?
Exactly, yes.
It's funny. I have heard narration demos that actually include things like IVR, like phone prompts in it. I remember back when I was working at Edge Studio, when David Goldberg was working on narration demos. He was a big believer in having a wide variety of narration on one given narration demo. As far as he was concerned, pretty much anything that wasn't commercial was narration. So he would even go so far sometimes as to put a phone prompt, an e-learn, maybe a short segment from an e-learning type of program. He might even do narration of like a documentary, of a TV documentary. I'm not sure that I'd go so far as to include a TV documentary on a narration demo. I think that broadcast narration is kind of a separate thing. But I remember David was pretty was pretty wide in the scope of the content in which he would include in a narration demo. Anybody else have any thoughts?
My suggestion would be to have individual demos for each of the genres, one for an explainer, for explainer videos, another for e-learning. That another for corporate narration, another for medical, if that's something you're interested in. You know, there's really a very different sound to each of these genres. And then you can do a compilation if you want, so that you've got, you know, little bits of all of those. But I think it's wise to be a little more specific, because oftentimes people who are looking to cast for an explainer video they're not going to want to hear a corporate read, presumably.
Thank you. And so the next question would be, what are the most stable in terms of areas of narration? What's the most stable one, the best paid one, and the easiest to get into? Stable in terms of the one that gives you more consistent work, the best paid in terms of narration, and the easiest to get into.
When it comes to what's the best paid, I would really think that e-learning is right up there, because e-learning, it's quite common to be getting anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per finished hour for e-learning. So it can be quite lucrative, especially if you get an e-learning program that might be a couple or 3 hours long, which is not unusual. It can be quite lucrative. I think the other question was stable, like where's there the most work?
Yeah, the one that has more consistent.
When I look at the online casting sites, I mean, explainer videos, they're just, I must see 15 or 20 auditions a day just for explainer videos. There's just so many of them, you know, explainer videos and short form corporate general purpose corporate videos that may be 90 seconds or 2 minutes long or something like that. So I would suggest that there's a substantial volume of work in those shorter form explainer video / short corporate videos. And those you can generally knock off for, you know, $300, $400, $500 a video. And, you know, at those kind of prices, you're going to be competitive from a pricing standpoint on the online casting sites. And that's not a bad rate of pay for a 90-second video that's going to reside on the internet.
Yeah. Perfect. And the easiest to get into?
I would still go back to explainer and short form narration, just because there's so many of them, and the jobs tend to be smaller. They're typically that, $400 range. So, I think that you have, and there's so many of them. I think just the law of odds is in your favor if you audition in that particular genre, versus e-learning, that there's a lot fewer e-learning jobs being posted to the online casting sites certainly that I've noticed.
That's true. That is true. Thank you very much.
Who else has got a question for us tonight?
Hi, Graham.
Hey, Pat, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
We keep talking about e-learning. Could you give me an example of e-learning?
Yeah, both within the educational context, but not necessarily. Often, e-learning is, when I say educational, within school environments, e-learning is become a big area outside of even just school environments, where a lot of corporate training is being done using e-learning type platforms. And these are, typically a course is divided up into modules. The modules are divided up into specific lessons. A specific lesson might be 3 to 5 minutes long. There's often a test at the end of each module, which is administered by the e-learning platform itself. It is, it's becoming an increasingly important area for voice actors, just because there's so much more of it being produced now. Hopefully that helped clarify for you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about e-learning.
Yes, thank you.
I've just posted the elearningindustry.com web address, which is just an industry trade group. And within it, I mean, I think you can get a real sense of all the different types of e-learning that are out there, from corporate through, school and so on. If you just take a look, it's elearningindustry.com, and I have posted the link. And I have a question about the production. I know with audiobooks, generally in a home studio, you make your recordings and then those are sent in and engineered and pretty heavily and EQ'd and compressed and so on. But with corporate narration, these short form narrations and e-learning stuff, to what level of polish do you need to get a product before you send it in? Can you make a general statement about that?
Most of the explainer videos and short form corporate videos that I'm speaking about are being produced by small production companies. So the level of polish, to use your term, that you need to do to your audio is fairly minimal. Most of these production companies are looking for, clean audio with a minimal amount of processing, and then they will process it however they see fit when they are doing the final production, the final mastering.
Good.
As compared to, e-learning as an example, where quite commonly you're expected to deliver a more polished sound, because often they're just going to take your files and dump them into the program versus, carefully mastering every individual file.
Is this a discussion that you have with their production team, like once you get hired, like what their specs are for just the sound should be like?
When you're talking about e-learning, you mean?
Yeah, e-learning and narration. I mean, to what extent do you interact with their arts department, whoever it is that puts these things together, that marries your audio with their video ultimately?
When it comes to e-learning, I typically will send them a sample file. If I'm going to be doing anything different than the way my audition sounded, then I will send them a sample file just to get their approval from a technical standpoint. Assuming I get that approval, then I'll process the rest of the e-learning project using that same those same effects,
same settings.
Yeah. But when it comes to actually working like a explainer video, where you're working with a production company of some sort, then again, I tend to default to far less processing, and which allows them to do their job better, when they are doing the final mix.
Mm-hmm.
Graham, I've looked into a trend where I have been hired for to record the voiceover for corporate presentations, like keynote speeches and things of that nature. I can't think of what it's called, but keynote is the name of the Apple product. Corporate slideshows and things of that nature. Now, would that fall under e-learning or narration, or both?
Well, it's probably more typically just corporate narration, where these are often presentations being mailed to sales conferences and things like that. And it wouldn't really be considered e-learning. E-learning usually is indicative that there's a specific e-learning platform being used. And usually e-learning involves a combination of both online text and narrated segments, which are kind of incorporated into the overall e-learning online process, versus the kind of stuff you're talking about where it's probably not being consumed online. It's probably being consumed actually in the meetings themselves, and it would just be more considered
True.
corporate narration.
I did do one recently that was a presentation about making presentations. So a little gray area there.
It's meta.
Yeah, indeed. A question from Dave, and Debbie, he's mentioning you specifically as someone that might have an answer for him. Any advice for marathon narrations? Like if you're doing real long form stuff, maybe it's an audiobook, but even if you're just doing like a 2-hour e-learning project or something, any tips with regards to booth techniques? How do you stay hydrated? How do you stay rested? How do you make sure your voice isn't being stressed? Any sort of advice with regards to long form narration?
Good luck. I've done audiobooks early in my career. I did some work for Audible before people were recording them on their own. And, I went to their studios, and they were very good about making sure that we paused periodically for me to, get up, walk around, stretch, continue to drink. Lozenges, are important. I think one of the most challenging experiences I've ever had was when I was hired to do a TTS project, a text to speech, and I was sent over to Edinburgh, Scotland, to do this project, and we were recording for 3 hours a day. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, and there have been times where I've seen projects posted where people talk about recording for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And I say it's absolutely insane, because after 3 hours of really going at it hard, your voice just gets tired, your throat gets sore. So I was going out buying whatever I could in these grocery stores and gargling with all kinds of crazy things, anytime I was taking a break during my session, because my throat was really, it really hurt. I think that we use different muscles in our work, and I think it is, while having stamina can come in a lot of different forms, and I think having to record 3 hours a day for 2 weeks or however long, I think that's also a muscle that needs to get built. Not everybody has the physical stamina, the emotional stamina to hang in there. But obviously staying super hydrated, all kinds of lozenges. I also actually, here's a tip for you guys. There's something called what the heck is it called? It's a Glycerine Swab, and they use them in hospitals. I buy them on Amazon. They're lemon glycerin, and it looks like a Q-tip, a one-sided Q-tip, and it comes in a little packet. There are 3 in the packet. And I use that very frequently, whether my mouth is dry or if my mouth is wet and too clicky. And I swab around, swab, and that just cleans my mouth. It doesn't help, with tiredness or a sore throat from voicing for extended periods, but it is a really wonderful little tool that I use to.
Debbie, do you stand up or do you sit down when you're doing long form narration?
If it's long, I'll usually sit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll usually sit if it's long. and it also kind of depends if I'm working on my own or if I'm in a studio working with someone. And it also might depend on the nature of the content.
Oh, we're losing you there, Deb.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little better. There's a fair amount of like scratchiness and background noise there.
Okay. How does this sound?
That's better.
Okay, good. So the other thing I was just saying is that depending on the nature of the content, if the content is such where you need a good deal of energy, then standing, I think, is more helpful than sitting. So, it's sort of project specific, but the longer it is, the more likely I am to sit.
I've always found it really hard to keep my energy up when I'm sitting down. No matter what the content is, I find it really hard to narrate anything sitting down. So even long form stuff, I'll generally stand for.
Interesting.
I just, I've been using this stuff. It's a hydration multiplier. It's used, I posted it a little bit, a few paragraphs back. It's used in parts of the world where water is scarce, and it increases the uptake of water into your system. So it might be a little helpful. I like it. I guess it's kind of the same idea as Gatorade, but I think it's like Gatorade on steroids. It's supposed to triple the uptake of the H2O into your system. I did also put the link for the lemon glycerine swabs up there. Sounds like I could use some right now myself.
I was just thinking that. Hey, Bill, maybe you need one of those swabs even as we speak.
Actually, without going that far, you know that the vocal cords are covered in collagen. So eating more gelatin and actually getting the capsules of collagen, that helps to keep them up to, like covered in collagen. Sorry.
That's a very interesting idea. I had actually just, for other reasons, I bought soluble collagen just for joints and nails and so on. That's it just came a couple days ago. I'm going to use that. Bear that in mind.
But that white thing that you see in your vocal cords, that whitish cover, that's actually collagen. So that should work. That's my guess, right? I got them, but I need to get some memory pills to take the collagen pills. And I did get the memory pills, and I forget to take the memory pills as well.
So it's 9:43 Eastern. We still have a few minutes left. Who's got a question for us with regards to narration? Anything to do with narration?
Guys, I don't know if you saw, there is a link that I put in there. It was the very first one that I found on Google. But going to all these events, conferences that are about e-learning, and just going there as a voiceover and finding all these companies, getting to understand how the business is working, the industry is working from the inside out. That would be like such a great idea. I know there's one coming very close in Las Vegas, I believe so, like the biggest one. But you imagine you being a voiceover and getting in touch directly to all these people who work in the e-learning industry. That would be like a clever move, probably.
When we have done this e-learning topic at various points in the past, several people have mentioned that they've gone to some of these e-learning conferences where all the publishers show up, and they say they've had tremendously successful trips by going to one of these conferences, and just walking the halls, walking up and down in the industry trade areas and introducing themselves to some of the various publishers. Some of the publishers are very large and they have a bit more hoops that you have to jump through in order to get on their roster. But some of these publishers are really quite small, and often the person you're speaking to at the trade booth is actually the person that's making the decisions in some cases with regards to the actual recorded talent. So I can definitely recommend going to some of these conferences as something that previous participants in OpenMicVO have found successful, have found to be very very good for their careers.
Yeah, I went. Thank you, Anna Maria. It's a great link. I just went through it briefly. It's really good. Highly recommended to everybody.
If someone happens to know about any of those in New York, I would highly appreciate it. I just got into the market last year. I got my work permit until last year, so I'm fresh meat, let's say, in this market. So if any of you have the information for these conferences in New York, I would really appreciate it.
Who else has got a question for us tonight? We're talking about narration on OpenMicVO.
It's quiet.
It's very quiet.
Let me break the silence here. I'm curious, what kind of replay rate, what kind of repeat business are folks getting from clients? Are they one-off on these, or if you land a client or two in the hallway at one of the events, are people getting repeat work from those, or do they like a wide variety of voices so they keep searching, like, oh, you've done 10 with us, we're going to try to get somebody else, or is it if you do a good job and you work well together as always, is it something you can ensure to have repeat business from a client?
My experience has definitely been positive when it comes to generating repeat business. I won a smallish, a lucrative, but a smallish e-learning project off of one of the online casting sites with a company that produces, like, their whole reason for being is producing e-learning projects. And they've been back, I don't know, a dozen times or more over the past 2 years with various projects, both large and small. So, and they've indicated to me that they like to work with people that they've worked with previously that have proved to be dependable. Yes, they want someone that speaks well and has a pleasing voice and is enunciates clearly and so on and so on. But making their lives easy from the standpoint of the work you do when you're not behind the mic, whether it is editing the files up in a way that is easiest for them to work with, labeling them properly, always delivering on time, always making sure your invoices are out on time. All of those things that are kind of basic customer service 101 go a long way with these companies because they're producing a substantial volume of work generally. And the easier you can make their producer's job, the better. So my experience has been very positive with regards to repeat business.
Thank you, Graham.
Anybody else have any experience with e-learning or corporate narration clients that you found either through your own business development efforts, or maybe you found them on one of the online casting sites? And have you found that they keep coming back once you've established a rapport, once you've established a relationship with them?
Graham, can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Hi, Deborah.
Hi. Yeah, I've picked up many clients, production companies through pay-to-play sites that, like you said, you develop these relationships. They know you do a good product, a good clean recording. You know, you have that good customer service. And so they like the work you do, and you get a lot of repeat business that way. So yes, it's all about developing those relationships. But yeah, my bread and butter is corporate narrations of all different forms. But that's yeah, it can be very steady work. So that's been my experience. And yes, when you give them good service, they will keep coming back. They know they can count on you for a good product, good recording. So that's been my experience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deb.
You're welcome.
Hi, Graham.
Haley, how are you?
Excellent. How are you?
Excellent, too.
Excellent. We're starting to sound like Wayne's World here. I just had a quick question with regards to editing long-form narration. I'm wondering what the average voiceover person does. Do you edit as you go? Or do you try to just do it all at the end? I guess it might depend on your studio setup, too.
That's a good question. And I typically tend to break the job into chunks. And that's usually not very hard when it comes to most narration projects because they come naturally, you know, either in chapters or in modules or, you know, in some other way broken up into chunks. So I don't record individual slides separately and then go edit them. But neither do I record the entire program and then go back and edit it afterwards. I tend to, I mean, part of it is just I like the variety of maybe recording for an hour and then editing for an hour versus, you know, recording for an entire day and then going back the next day to edit it. So that's how I work it. I typically, you know, record in, you know, largest chunks and then go back and edit them, you know, before moving on to the next.
Sure. That's great.
You're right, though. The studio setup has a lot to do with it because, you know, in my particular situation, my booth is over there to my right, and you know, I don't have a keyboard and stuff in there. I literally have to kind of press record here at my desk and then, you know, do the little, you know, 3 or 4 foot trip over to my booth and go in and just record whatever it is, you know, I speak into the mic at that point. And then I have to come back to my desk to stop the recording. So, you know, it doesn't make sense to go back and forth too often. So that's why I like to break it into, like, you know, 5-minute or 7-minute chunks and record in that way.
Yeah, that's exactly how I do it too, just going back and forth in and out of the booth. And
Yeah.
maybe it would be a subject for a studio setup night of, you know, maybe having a monitor, a very quiet monitor inside the booth and being able to edit in there, you know, just to kind of pull out some of the flubs and things like that.
Yeah, because in my particular case, I can't do what's called punch and roll, which is a recording technique often used by audiobook narrators and narrators of other long form genres, where when you make a mistake, you go back immediately and what's called punch in and pick up the recording from the point where you made the mistake. I can't do that in my particular setup here now, which makes it difficult for me to perform really long form narration or audiobooks, as an example.
Right. Thanks very much.
Anybody else? It's 9:55. We've got time for maybe one or maybe two more questions before we call it a night, talking about narration.
Yeah, if people are curious about Punch and Roll, there is a free Presonus, Presonus. Studio One is available as a free. It's kind of a baseline recording, or DAW, and it does host Punch and Roll. And there's a small device that you can get called a fader port, which has a Punch and Roll button right on it. So it's also made by Presonus. So if you're interested in that kind of technology.
I was going to say the new edition of Audacity 2.3 has Punch and Roll now.
Very good.
Anybody else have one last question they want to slip in before we call it a night tonight?
I'm going to go talk to people all day tomorrow. So.
Okay.
Rest. Thank you, Graham.
Then we are going to call it a night then. Thank you all so much for your participation tonight. It's been great to have you all here with us. Thank you for spending an hour of your Sunday evening with us at OpenMicVO, brought to you, of course, by World Voices. And you can learn more about World Voices at world-voices.org. So have a great night. Have a great week. Until next Sunday night, book lots of work. Good night, everybody.
Hi, Graham.
Good night. Thank you.